Hello and welcome to HopefulHomemaker.com. Today we are going to be learning how to make half rectangle triangles. You can see here that I have two of them already made. We've got one where the angle goes to the left if you have them stood up on their short end, and the other where the diagonal goes off to the right. We're going to be talking about how to make both of these. Rather than calling them left and right, we're going to call them A and B. And this is how they're labeled in my patterns. I will explain why we're going to reference them that way. You can see here with this angle going from the bottom right to the top left, it's kind of obvious that it would be a half rectangle triangle where the angle is pointing off to the left side. But as soon as we take one of these, and here's a second one, as soon as we take one, if we turn the half rectangle triangle on its long side, you can see now I have an angle going from the bottom left up to the top right, which can make it a little bit confusing. And so in the serve pattern that I'm actually making this tutorial video for, all of your half rectangle triangles are going to be discussed as if they are oriented this way, standing on their short side with the long side going up, so like portrait orientation. And the angles are going to go either to the left or to the right. But to avoid confusion, if you were to flip them, we're going to call this A. So these are half rectangle triangles A, and then we have the other angle, which you can see the same principle applies, and here is B. So I'm going to be demonstrating for you how to make both of these. It's really not a difficult thing to do. You just have to pay attention to a few simple things, but I've got some tips that should make that really easy for you. So let's begin. We are going to start here with two sets of rectangles. So I have what I'm using as, I'm calling this my foreground fabric and my background fabric, and I have four rectangles each, so I have a total of 8 here. And the reason I'm showing you 8 is because I want to demonstrate one thing, and that is that if you see here, I want to make left and right, or I want to make A and B half rectangle triangles with these. And so I'm going to need to cut with my ruler. I'm going to need to cut all of these rectangles on the diagonal angle. Triangles A, I'm going to go from the bottom right hand corner to the top left. For B, I'm going to go from the bottom left corner to the top right. I will be doing that. But first, there's a really important thing to do. And that is, if you're using a print, you have to notice, if you just cut a strip like I did from selvage to selvage and then cut 2 rectangles, I can't leave this the way it is. If I do, I'm going to have a problem. So whenever you cut, you're going to flip all of your fabrics and make sure that everything is facing up. And I'm going to align those carefully, and I'm actually going to just put all 4 of them together, do them in one cut here. So I'm going to get these ready so these can be cut for a half rectangle triangle A, and then I have to do the same thing with all of the others for a half rectangle triangle B. So I've got to turn this one also right side up, make sure that all of the prints are facing up. I'm going to line these up as carefully as possible and get ready to cut them on the diagonal. So the reason this is called a half rectangle triangle is simply because we're taking rectangles, cutting them in half on the diagonal, making triangles, and then sewing them back together again. So now I have 2 little sets of fabric here that are ready to go. I'm left-handed, so I obviously use my ruler a little bit differently than right-handed people do. First step is to cut. And then I will also cut going the opposite direction here. I just cut the B, now I'm going to cut A. Alright, so now you can see I have two sets here. On the left here I've got pieces cut for half rectangle triangle A, and here for half rectangle triangle B. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to separate them, and as you can see, because I made them right side up, they're all going to work. So I can just flip these around, and now I have 4 of these triangles, and I'm going to flip these and I'm ready to go there. For my B blocks, I'm going to do the same thing, where I flip them around. I just rotate them. Then I'm going to do the same with the solid. And now I am ready to go. Really quickly before I move on, I want to just demonstrate for you what will happen if you forget to turn a print right side up and trim it the wrong way. So let's say that I was going to cut these to make half rectangle triangle B. You can see I have two pieces here, but the wrong sides are together and right sides are facing out. And if I cut from corner to corner on the diagonal, so because this is a B, I'm cutting from the bottom left corner to the top right. If I do that and I cut them, my top fabric looks fine. But what happens is when I go to flip them, I have two here. So these work exactly how I want, but these obviously don't flip because of the right side. So when I flip them right side up, what I really did was I cut one of each. I cut an A and I cut a B. And so that is why we want to always make sure that we put all of our prints right side up at the beginning before we do any cutting so that we can avoid this. Now obviously if you make that mistake, it can usually be used if you remember to just adjust your cutting, but it's much easiest to just have a habit of always checking the fabrics to make sure that they're stacked right side up if it's a print before you start cutting. So now that we've cut, let's talk about what we're going to do to sew these together. For the A block, we want to take an A, two pieces, and I'll kind of show you actually right now how the B looks. Actually, wrong one. And B. So we're going to flip these. So the side for the A, we're going to flip that top, kind of the top right rectangle over like that, and if we're sewing a B block, we're going to flip this the other way. You can see that they look a little bit different. Now that's just because we are not working on a symmetrical line across like we are with a half square triangle. The thing to remember about this when you sew together, if possible, is you just want to try and offset in your corners so that you can have a good seam allowance on both ends. Let me show you what I've done here. What I've done is here's an A block, here is a B block. And you can see if I were to align the top and the bottom the way I would want to, they look a little bit different. I have taken a ruler and just for demonstrating for you, I've shown you this little tiny point. Here is your 1/4 inch line coming in. So you want to line this up approximately like that. Here's another 1/4 inch line that I made on this. If you want to, because we're working on a bias, you can put pins in your blocks. And now what you're going to do is you're going to simply sew a 1/4 inch seam going down the angle on both of these blocks. Once you sew them, then they're going to look like this. Okay, now I have sewn my half rectangle triangles, so you can see where I showed a little black line I had made. If you sew right along the 1/4 inch seam, then you're going to have a block that looks like this. Now, I just want to say this is an awesome precaution because we are dealing with a seam on the bias, but I believe you'll find that once you've made a couple of them, that this won't be necessary, that as long as you're not tugging and pulling on your fabric and you're just gently sending it through your machine, you're going to be able to just eyeball this and sew without pins. I don't mark or pin most my blocks as I go. I just am able to kind of eye that 1/4 inch. Now it's not a 1/4 inch from the corner, it's a 1/4 inch in from this diagonal line. Just kind of eyeball that and sew. Here I have A and B. Both of them are now sewn together and ready to go, so I will press these with the seams closed to help set that seam and set that thread really well. And then once they're pressed, I will open. Some people like to press their seams open. I usually press to one side. I don't even think I was careful about which side I do this to. Typically, I will press mine all to whatever side is the darker fabric. So what I want to talk about now for just a minute is why we have to trim the half rectangle triangles in an unusual way. And that's actually the trickiest part of making them. Sewing them, as you can see, is really easy. Here's a half square triangle, and because of it being a square, these seam lines go into the corners of this block on a 45-degree angle, which means that if we come in a 1/4 inch when we're sewing it together, this point is still going to touch in the corner. That is not the case with the half rectangle triangle. The half rectangle triangle does not have the diagonals seams going into the corners at a 45-degree angle. And so if we just trim these tails off and assume we're good to go, it is not going to work, because you are going to have your quarter-inch seam allowance hit in the wrong spot. And as you can see here, I went ahead and marked those spots on here. Quarter-inch will hit here and here, which would leave this diagonal line not going into the corners when it's sewn together. Same with the B block. The quarter-inch will hit here and here. It's harder to see because it's on the little part of the leaf. What that means is that we cannot just trim this squared up with this seam going into the corner. We have to trim it differently. And I'm not worried about these lines because actually we're going to trim it down enough that this fabric will completely disappear. So the way we're going to trim, we're going to make a custom ruler for ourselves to do this.